The soft click of the bedroom door at 3:17 a.m. was the only sound in the house besides the low, conspiratorial murmur of the rain. Mara had meant to come to bed an hour earlier, but she'd been curled in the den with the throw blanket that smelled of cedar and the faint trace of Elliot's aftershave, whispering into her phone as if the walls themselves were listening. When she finally slipped under the sheets, her body was warm from the call, her cheeks flushed with something between guilt and exhilaration. Elliot, half asleep, instinctively curved an arm around her waist and murmured, "Everything okay?" She answered by pressing her spine into him, a wordless yes that felt, for the first time in months, like the truth. They had promised each other, 12 years and one mortgage ago, that they would never become the couple who kept secrets the way other people collected vintage postcards. Curiosities to be dusted off when guests came over, proof of how interesting they used to be. But sometime between the second miscarriage and Elliot's father's stroke, their conversations had flattened into logistics. They still touched, an elbow guiding past the open dishwasher, a palm against the small of her back at neighborhood parties. But the electricity that once traveled beneath the skin had been rerouted into calendars and color-coded grocery lists. So when Mara started calling the anonymous grief support hotline every Tuesday and Thursday night, she told herself it wasn't a betrayal. It was simply breathing into an oxygen mask before assisting others. Elliot, for his part, had stopped writing the confessional emails he once composed in his head on the commute home. Instead, he funneled his private terrors. Insufficient retirement fund, the way Mara's eyes stayed glassy long after she stopped crying, the suspicion that he had already experienced the best week of his life, into terse bullet points on legal pads that he shredded every Friday. They were living shoulder to shoulder in a marriage that looked, from the curb, like sturdiness itself. 2 hybrids in the driveway, pollinator-friendly garden, even a ceramic frog the previous owners had left behind. Inside, though, the air was so thick with everything unsaid that sometimes Mara's lungs felt packed with wet sand. The hotline volunteer introduced herself only as A. Her voice was low, cigarette rough, and she never interrupted. Mara pictured her in a studio apartment lit by a single banker's lamp, surrounded by ferns and the smell of Earl Grey. She never asked Mara to explain why she kept calling. She simply waited, breathing like someone who had practiced stillness in the folds of her own damage. Over weeks, Mara found herself narrating the microscopic shifts in her days. The way the grocery store florist had slipped a free stem of sweet pea into her bunch, how she'd stood in the freezer aisle and cried because the cold felt honest. She never mentioned Elliot by name, just my husband. But her stories orbited him like moons around a planet she was no longer sure contained atmosphere. Elot's own covert ritual happened at dawn. He would rise at 5:30, make coffee that was too strong, and open the spreadsheet he kept buried 3 folders deep on the shared laptop. It was labeled House Projects, but the cells were filled with memories he was afraid of forgetting. The first time Mara had danced with him in a laundromat, the joke she'd made about otters that had made him snort beer through his nose, the exact shade of copper her hair turned in July. Each morning he added one new line, as if enough data could create a firewall against the erosion of ordinary life. He never read the entries aloud. They were simply code against oblivion. Then came the 3rd Thursday in October. Mara had ended her call with A. early, claiming a headache, and had gone to the kitchen to pour a glass of water that she did not drink. Elliot, unable to sleep, had opened the laptop at 4:02 a.m. to add line 312. Mara hiccuped in her sleep, sounded like a kitten. He hit save, and the blue wheel spun longer than usual. A dialog box popped up. Upload complete. One file sent to contact Mara Jennings. His pulse stumbled. He had never entered Mara's email into any field. The computer must have autofilled from an old invoice. In the silent kitchen, the laptop fan whirred like a distant helicopter. He clicked Sent Mail. There it was, the entire spreadsheet, raw and ridiculous, addressed to his wife. Mara's phone buzzed on the nightstand at 4:05. She saw the subject line, House Projects, and assumed it was a late-night whim about gutter guards. But when she opened the attachment, the grid unfurled like a secret garden. Row after row of tiny monuments to a marriage she thought had become a ghost town. She read until the screen burned her eyes, then padded to the kitchen in her sock feet. Elliot was standing at the counter, shoulders caved inward, as if awaiting execution. When he looked up, his face held the same expression it had the night he'd proposed and dropped the ring into a storm drain. Terrified, exhilarated, absurdly alive. She spoke first, voice barely above the hum of the refrigerator. I thought I was the only one smuggling contraband emotions. A laugh escaped her, small, hiccuped, the same noise he had just catalogued. Elliot stepped forward, hands raised like someone approaching a skittish animal. I didn't mean to send it. Mara tilted her head. But you wrote it. The statement hung between them, shimmering. She reached past him, opened the spreadsheet again, and scrolled to the bottom where a blank row pulsed. With 2 thumbs she typed, October 22nd, for 07 a.m., he still sees me. She hit save, then turned the screen so he could watch the cursor blink. Neither remembered who moved first, but suddenly they were tangled against the dishwasher, kissing with the urgency of teenagers who had to catch the last bus. It was messy, noses bumped, teeth clacked, and when Elliot's lower back knocked the coffee maker's carafe off the counter, it shattered in a brown constellation across the tile. They separated long enough to laugh, the sound ricocheting off stainless steel like a pinball. Mara grabbed the dustpan. Elliot fetched paper towels. Together they knelt, sopping the cold coffee, collecting glass shards that glinted like miniature galaxies. When their fingers brushed, Mara whispered, "We're going to cut ourselves." Elliot answered, "Better than bleeding alone." By the time the sky outside turned the color of a healing bruise, they had migrated to the living room couch, knees pulled under blankets that still smelled of cedar. Mara told him about the sweet pea stem, about the wet sand in her lungs. Elliot told her about the spreadsheet, about line 312, about the terror that the best week of his life was behind him. They spoke in the same soft register she had used on the phone, as though the rain were eavesdropping and might report back to some cosmic auditor. When the alarm on Elliot's phone announced it was time for him to shower for work, he turned it off and pulled her closer. "Call in sick," he said. Mara, who had never missed a board meeting, answered by dialing the school secretary right there on speaker. She cited family maintenance. The woman on the other end chuckled as if she understood. They spent the day in the gap they had carved open. First, pancakes shaped like continents because the batter was too thick to swirl. Then slow-motion lovemaking with all the lights on, studying the cartography of familiar territory made new by admission. At noon, they walked to the park and took selfies with the ceramic frog someone had left on a bench, its green glaze cracked like antique pottery. They sent the photo to no one. It was evidence for an archive that required no cloud storage. Back home, they napped, limbs braided, until the October sun dropped behind the maple and the room filled with golden dust motes that looked like suspended applause. When evening came, they sat at the kitchen table with the laptop between them. Elliot created a new tab titled Co-authored. Mara typed the first entry. 10:20 seconds. Accidental email forwarded the ongoing secret. We still choose each other. They added rules. No editing, no deleting, 1 line each per day, written after 10 p.m. when the world's demands had clocked out. They did not promise to fix everything. They simply agreed to keep the document open, like a window in a house that had been sealed too long. Outside, the rain started up again, soft and conspiratorial. Inside, they sat shoulder to shoulder, listening to the hard drive whir, the gentle click of keys recording the small, defiant sound of 2 people learning to whisper in the same direction.